A blind date on Christmas Eve, the unlucky single mother arrived late, but the billionaire waited anyway and was surprised. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The siren of an ambulance echoed down Fifth Avenue as Sarah Johnson ran along the sidewalk, her worn sneakers hitting the wet concrete from the light December rain. At 35, she carried much more than just her tattered bag and the poorly wrapped gifts that swayed in her trembling hands. The navy blue uniform of the cleaning company was still damp with sweat, marked by the hours she spent scrubbing the marble floors of the most luxurious office building in the Upper East Side. "Oh my God, I'm going to be even later," she murmured to herself, checking her cracked phone screen. It was already 8:30 p.m., and she was supposed to have arrived at the restaurant by 7 p.m. Her best friend, Lisa, had insisted so much on this blind date that Sarah finally caved, more to make her stop talking about it than out of real interest in meeting someone new. Sarah stopped in front of a storefront mirror to try to fix herself up. The reflection staring back showed a woman with delicate features, but marked by fatigue. Her naturally curly brown hair was pulled into a messy bun, with a few rebellious strands escaping and framing her oval face. The hazel-green eyes, once described as the most expressive in the neighborhood during her teenage years, now carried a mix of determination and exhaustion from years of solitary struggle. "You can do this, Sarah. It's just one more thing to get through," she whispered to her reflection, trying to smooth out her wrinkled uniform. The stains from cleaning products on the sleeves were inevitable after a whole day of cleaning executive bathrooms and meeting rooms where men in suits discussed business that moved millions. Her phone vibrated with a message from Lisa. "He's still waiting. I told him you were stuck in traffic. Hurry, girl." Sarah took a deep breath and kept running. The streets downtown were bustling with the typical Christmas Eve activity, families carrying shopping bags, street vendors offering last-minute gift opportunities, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mixed with the aroma of coffee wafting from the still open cafes. As she ran, her mind wandered to the children she had left at home. Julia, 16, was taking care of her younger brother, Peter, 12. The teenager had inherited her mother's expressive eyes, but also a premature maturity that broke Sarah's heart. Julia never complained about having to take on responsibilities she shouldn't have at her age, looking after her brother while their mother worked 3 different jobs. "If I had known it would be this hard," Sarah shook her head, pushing away the pessimistic thoughts. It was no use lamenting now. When David, the children's father, simply disappeared 3 years ago, leaving only a letter saying he wasn't ready to be a dad, she had to completely reinvent herself. The restaurant appeared before her like a lit oasis. Il Giardino was written in golden letters on the glass facade, and Sarah could see through the wide windows that the atmosphere was much more sophisticated than she had imagined. Tables with white tablecloths, crystal glasses sparkling under the warm light of the fixtures, and impeccably dressed waiters circulating among customers who clearly didn't worry about the menu prices. "What am I doing here?" she thought, feeling ridiculous in her work uniform. For a moment she considered turning back and making up some excuse to Lisa. Later, but something made her stop. Perhaps the memory of her friend's worried expression when she said Sarah needed to live a little and stop sacrificing so much. She pushed through the glass door and was greeted by a chic blonde hostess dressed in a black blazer that probably cost more than Sarah earned in a month. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, I'm looking for—" Sarah hesitated, realizing Lisa hadn't mentioned the man's full name. "It's a date set up by Lisa Johnson?" The hostess checked a golden ledger and smiled. "Ah, yes, Mr. David is waiting. Table 12 at the back." Sarah followed the indicated direction, passing tables occupied by well-dressed couples and groups of executives celebrating the end of the year. The noise of animated conversations and the clinking of utensils against fine china created an atmosphere she had never experienced before. Table 12 was in a more secluded corner of the restaurant, illuminated by a small lamp that created an intimate setting. A man was sitting with his back to her, fiddling with his phone. When Sarah approached, he looked up, and she felt as if time had stopped for a second. David Thompson was 42, but looked a few years younger. His dark brown hair had grey strands at the temples that gave him a distinguished air, and his blue-grey eyes were intense and intelligent. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, but had removed his tie and unbuttoned a few buttons of his white shirt, giving him a less formal appearance. His face was angular, with a 5 o'clock shadow, suggesting he had had a long day at work. "Sarah?" he asked, immediately standing up and extending his hand. "Sorry for being late," she said, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "The traffic was impossible, and Don't worry," David interrupted with a genuine smile. "I just arrived a little while ago, and to be honest, I was too nervous to notice the wait." Sarah blinked, surprised by his honesty. She had prepared for formal apologies or even justified irritation, but not for that disarming confession. "Nervous? You?" she asked, accepting the chair he had pulled out for her. David chuckled softly, returning to his seat. "Lisa didn't tell you? I'm terrible at this. In meetings, actually this is the first in, well, a long time." There was something in the way he spoke, without arrogance, without haste, that made Sarah relax slightly. She watched his hands as he gestured. They were well groomed, but not overly so, and she noticed a small cut on his right index finger. "Lisa said you work in technology," Sarah asked, trying to divert attention from her own inappropriate appearance for the environment. "Yes, systems development for companies. And you?" She mentioned something about administrative services. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The first lie. It wasn't technically a lie, she rationalized internally. After all, cleaning was a type of administrative service, right? "Yes, I work with facilities management, building maintenance, that sort of thing," she replied, choosing her words carefully. David nodded, looking genuinely interested. "That must be quite a dynamic job. I imagine you have to solve many different problems every day." "You have no idea," Sarah laughed, and for the first time in years, the laughter was completely natural and not forced. "And you? What's it like working in technology? It must be fascinating." "Sometimes it's frustrating," David admitted, pouring water for both of them, "especially when you have innovative ideas but have to deal with, let's say, traditional expectations." There was something in his tone that suggested deeper layers of conflict, but Sarah didn't feel comfortable probing further on the first date. The waiter approached and David looked at her. "What would you like to order?" Sarah opened the menu and nearly choked upon seeing the prices. The cheapest dish cost the equivalent of what she spent on food in an entire week. "Could you recommend something?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "The mushroom risotto is exceptional here," David suggested, "and they make a grilled salmon that is my favorite." Sarah nodded, quickly closing the menu. "The risotto sounds great." As David placed the order with the waiter, Sarah observed the restaurant's ambiance. Every detail screamed sophistication and wealth, from the fresh flower arrangements on each table to the marble floor that she recognized from having cleaned similar floors in other commercial buildings. It was a world completely different from hers, a place where people seemed not to worry about bills at the end of the month or uniforms stained with cleaning products. "Are you okay?" David asked, noticing her distraction. "Yes, sorry, it's just... This place is beautiful," she replied honestly. "It's a bit too formal for my taste, actually, but I thought it would be suitable for a first date," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that surprised her. Next time, if there is a next time, we can go to a more authentic place." The word authentic echoed in Sarah's mind as an ironic reminder of all the half-truths she had told that night. But there was something in the way David spoke, the way his eyes lit up when he smiled, that made her want to be authentic too, even knowing that the whole truth could ruin any chance of getting to know that intriguing man further. The night was just beginning, but Sarah already felt that something had changed within her. Perhaps it was dangerous, perhaps it was an illusion, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine that she deserved to be there, in that beautiful place, talking to someone who looked at her as if she were interesting and valuable. She still didn't know that just a few meters away, in the kitchens of the same building where she worked every night, there were photos of David as a child. Hanging on the wall of the boardroom, she religiously cleaned at 3 in the morning. 2 weeks had passed since that first night at Il Giardino, and Sarah still felt butterflies in her stomach whenever her phone rang. David had kept his promise to find more authentic places. He took her to a pizzeria in Greenwich Village, where the waiter knew them by their first names, to an antique fair in Chelsea, where they bought old vinyl records, and to a hidden cafe on West 8th Street that served the best coffee Sarah had ever tasted. It was a Friday, 3:15 a.m., and she was on the 22nd floor of the Thompson corporate building, wiping down the mirrored surfaces of the reception area. The building at night had a completely different atmosphere. Quiet, with only the emergency lights casting long shadows down the marble corridors. Sarah knew every corner of that place. She knew that the coffee machine on the 10th floor made a strange noise when it needed maintenance, that the executive restroom on the 15th floor had a faucet that dripped, and that on the 25th floor, the top, was the president's office with a panoramic view of all of New York. As she cleaned, her mind wandered to the conversation she had with David the night before. They had walked through Central Park after dinner, and he had mentioned family pressures related to work. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living the life my father planned for me, not the one I chose," he had confessed, kicking a pebble on the path. "He's preparing to retire and expects me to take over everything, not just the job, but a whole lifestyle." Sarah had held his hand at that moment, feeling the smooth texture of his skin that had never known calluses or roughness. "And what do you really want?" "Authenticity," he replied without hesitation. "Real relationships. A life that makes sense." The elevator in the building emitted a soft ding, pulling Sarah from her memories. She frowned. There shouldn't be anyone in the building at this hour. Quickly she hid behind the reception desk, listening to footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. "Needs to be ready by Monday." A familiar male voice reached her. Sarah felt the blood run cold in her veins as she recognized the tone. It was David. "Yes, sir. I will review all the contracts again," replied a female voice. Marina identified as being the executive secretary, Dr. Helen, an elegant woman in her 50s, who always greeted Marina politely when they met in the elevators. Marina remained motionless, her heart pounding so hard she feared it could be heard. Edward was there, just a few meters away from her, in his workplace. The real world and the fantasy world she had created were colliding in a way that terrified her. "The meeting with the Japanese is crucial for our Asian expansion," Edward continued, his voice sounding different, more authoritative, colder than the affectionate tone he used with her. "My father may be retiring, but I won't let down his 25 years of hard work." "I completely understand, Dr. Edward. Your dedication is admirable," replied Helen. Marina felt as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life. Dr. Edward, 25 years of his father's work, Asian expansion. The pieces of a puzzle began to form in her mind, creating an image that terrified her. She managed to peek over the counter and saw Edward in profile, wearing a pristine grey suit even at that early hour. His hair, was perfectly styled, and he held a brown leather briefcase that seemed to cost more than Marina's monthly salary. This was not the laid-back Edward who ate pizza with his hands and laughed at her bad jokes. This was the executive, the heir, the man who belonged to a completely inaccessible world for her. "Helen, a personal question," Edward said, stopping near the windows that offered a view of the sleeping city. "Do you think it's possible for someone from our social position to have a genuine relationship with someone from a completely different background?" Marina held her breath. "Well," Helen hesitated, clearly surprised by the question. "I believe love knows no social barriers, Doctor, but I also know that significant differences can create practical complications." "Complications like what?" "Different family expectations, social pressures, the difficulty of integrating two very distinct worlds," Helen explained diplomatically. "Why do you ask?" Edward remained silent for a long moment. "Just curiosity. Sometimes I wonder if I'm living in a bubble. If I may observe, Doctor, you've shown positive changes in recent weeks. You seem more at ease." Marina saw Edward smile, the same smile he directed at her. "It's true. I've met someone who makes me question many things about my life. Someone special. Very special. She works in administrative services, is independent, and has a completely different perspective on life than mine. When I'm with her, I feel like I can be myself without all those expectations and protocols." Marina's heart constricted. He was talking about her, but describing a distorted version of the truth. She wasn't independent. She was desperate. She didn't have a different perspective on life by choice, but by necessity. "That sounds wonderful," Helen commented. "And does she know about all this?" She gestured to encompass the luxurious office. "Not exactly. I'm afraid that if she knows who I really am, it will change everything between us." Marina had to bite her lip to keep from making a sound. The irony was painful. They were both hiding the truth from each other, but for opposite reasons. "Dr. Edward, if I may offer advice from someone who has lived a few decades," Helen said gently, "the truth always finds a way to come out. It's better if you tell her before she finds out on her own." "I know. I just need to find the right way." They walked toward the elevator and Marina shrank further behind the counter. Only when she heard the ding of the elevator and the silence return to the floor did she allow herself to breathe normally. With trembling legs, she stood up and looked around the luxurious reception with completely different eyes. The gold plaques on the wall, which she mechanically cleaned every night, now had meaning. Thompson and Associates, Global Corporate Solutions. On the main wall, there was a black and white photo of an older man inaugurating the building in 1987, clearly Edward's father. Marina ascended to the 25th floor with automatic steps, her mind processing information at a frantic pace. The president's office was her favorite to clean, not only because it was spacious and well lit, but because it had a special energy. Now she understood why. Entering the room, she turned on the lights and looked around with new eyes. The solid mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, with two Italian leather chairs facing it. On the side wall, there was a bookshelf filled with books on business management, international economics, and some biographies of famous entrepreneurs. But what caught her attention were the family photos discreetly placed in a corner of the desk. With her heart racing, Marina approached. In the first photo, she saw a boy of perhaps 10 years, clearly Edward, hugging a man in a suit, his father. In the second, teenage Edward wearing the uniform of a private school that Marina knew was one of the most expensive in New York. In the third, Edward graduating from college, surrounded by a family that radiated prosperity and tradition. "My God," she whispered to the empty room. "What have I gotten myself into?" Her phone buzzed with a message from Edward. "Good night, Princess. I dreamed of you this morning. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Marina looked at the message, then at the photos, then at her navy blue uniform with the cleaning company's logo. The distance between the two worlds felt like an insurmountable chasm. She was not the independent and interesting woman Edward thought he knew. She was the cleaner who tidied up his offices, who supported 2 children on minimum wage, who lived in a small house in the outskirts where the heater broke in winter. But there was something even more disturbing than the Marina was falling in love. Each conversation, every shared laugh, every moment of genuine connection was taking root in her heart, which she knew would be painful to uproot. She finished cleaning the presidential suite with mechanical movements, avoiding looking again at the photographs. When she got home at 6 a.m., she found Julia preparing breakfast coffee for her brother. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Julia commented, concerned. Marina hugged her daughter, inhaling the scent of cheap shampoo and youth. "Just tired, sweetheart. A lot of work." But as she showered and got ready to sleep for a few hours before her next shift, Marina knew her life had changed irreversibly that morning. She had discovered she was living in 2 parallel worlds that could never meet, and that sooner or later she would have to choose which one was real. January brought a suffocating heat to New York, and with it an intensification in the relationship between Marina and Edward that left her simultaneously euphoric and terrified. They met almost every weekend, always in places that Edward carefully chose. Charming cafes in Greenwich Village, trendy restaurants on West 8th Street, the municipal market on Saturday mornings. For Marina, each meeting was an acting lesson where she needed to be the version of herself that Edward had known. Independent, carefree, without children. "Tell me more about your family," Edward had asked one Sunday afternoon while they were walking through Central Park. They had rented bikes, an extravagance that Marina pretended to find normal, although internally she calculated how many hours of work that represented. "There's not much to tell," Marina replied, adjusting the helmet that Edward insisted on renting for safety. "My parents died when I was young. I have a few cousins, but we're kind of distant." It was technically true. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 22, leaving her completely alone in the world until she met Rodrigo. But she carefully omitted any mention of the children who were the center of her universe. "And you? Big family?" she asked, changing the subject as they pedaled slowly along the bike path. Edward laughed, but there was tension in his voice. "Well, it's complicated, actually. My dad is very traditional. He has specific plans for my life that don't always align with mine." "What kind of plans?" "Marriage to someone from our circle," Edward made air quotes, almost losing his balance on the bike. "Kids by 45. Fully taking over the family business, a life completely mapped out." Marina felt a pang in her chest. "And what do you want?" "You." Edward suddenly stopped the bike and looked into her eyes. "I want to see where this goes between us. I want to know your dreams, your annoying quirks. I want to know how you are when you're in a bad mood." Marina's heart raced. If he knew how she was when she was in a bad mood, worried about bills, exhausted after 3 shifts of work, trying to help Julia with homework while Peter demanded attention, would he still find her interesting? "Edward?" she started, but he interrupted her with a gentle kiss that made all her worries evaporate momentarily. "Sorry," he said when they pulled apart. "That was an impulse, but I don't regret it." Marina smiled, genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. "Me neither." 2 weeks later, Marina faced her biggest challenge yet. Edward had casually mentioned that his company was throwing a party to celebrate a big contract signed with a Japanese multinational, exactly the contract she had heard him discussing that morning. It's kind of boring, but I thought you might like to see my work world, he said during dinner at an Italian restaurant in Chelsea. Nothing too formal, but, well, it's important to me that you're there. Marina nearly choked on the gnocchi. The party would be in the very building where she worked, in the event hall on the ground floor that she helped clean and decorate for special occasions. I don't know if I have the right outfit for this kind of event, she said, and it was the purest truth. Don't worry about that, Edward smiled. You look beautiful in anything. But Marina knew it wasn't about looking beautiful. It was about survival. How could she attend a company party where she worked as a cleaner, pretending to be a facilities executive? What if a colleague recognized her? What if Edward's father was there? Edward, about this party, she tried again. You don't want to go, he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that hit her hard. I understand if it's too soon to meet my work environment, but it's not that, Marina lied. It's just, I'm afraid I won't fit in. Edward took her hand across the table. Marina, you fit into my life in a way I never thought possible. Don't worry about anything else. On the night of the party, Marina stood in front of the mirror in the women's dressing room of the building where she worked, wearing the only elegant dress she owned, a simple black one she had bought on sale years ago for a cousin's wedding. She had borrowed dress shoes from Lisa and spent the afternoon trying to tame her curly hair into a more sophisticated hairstyle. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection. It's just one night. Go in, stay an hour, and leave. The event hall was unrecognizable. The same walls she cleaned weekly were now decorated with imported flower arrangements and indirect lighting that created an elegant atmosphere. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes, and the ambient music was smooth jazz played by a live trio. Marina arrived after the party was already in full swing, hoping to blend into the crowd without drawing attention. Edward spotted her immediately and walked toward her with a radiant smile. You came, he said, kissing her cheek. I was starting to get worried. Sorry for the delay, the traffic. She began her rehearsed excuse, but David interrupted her. It doesn't matter. You're here now. Come on. I want to introduce you to some people. Sarah's heart raced. David, I really don't need to meet. Of course you do, he said, guiding her through the hall. You're part of my life now. Sarah allowed herself to be led, her eyes constantly scanning the room for familiar faces. She recognized a few executives who worked on the higher floors, people she occasionally saw in the elevators during her late-night shifts. Fortunately, none of them seemed to notice her presence. Sarah, I want you to meet Dr. Henry Thompson, my father, David said, stopping in front of an elegant man in his 60s, completely grey hair and blue eyes identical to his son's. Sarah felt the world spin. There was the man from the photographs, the founder of the company, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo and animatedly conversing with a group of investors. When David interrupted them, Dr. Henry turned with the politely interested expression of someone used to meeting many people at social events. Dad, this is Sarah, the one I've told you so much about, David said. With evident pride, Dr. Henry extended his hand with a courteous smile. Sarah, David can't stop talking about you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. The pleasure is mine, Sarah managed to say, shaking his hand and praying her voice wouldn't tremble. David told me you work in facilities management. Interesting field. Very important these days, Dr. Henry commented. Which company do you work for? Sarah felt cold sweat trickling down her back. It's a smaller company. We provide services for various clients. I see. And what kind of challenges do you face on a daily basis? The question was innocent, but Sarah felt as if she were being interrogated. Well, each building has its particularities, It's essential to know the environments well, the schedules, the specific needs of each client. Very interesting. Dr. Henry nodded. David, you chose an intelligent and dedicated woman. Congratulations. Thank you, Dad, David smiled, wrapping his arm around Sarah's waist. Sarah is extraordinary. The conversation was interrupted by a man in a suit who approached with an urgent expression. Dr. Henry, sorry to interrupt, but the Japanese investors would like to speak with you. Of course, Dr. Henry apologized. Sarah, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope to see you around more often. As he walked away, David turned to Sarah with a satisfied expression. He liked you, I can tell. How can you be sure? Sarah asked, still processing the encounter. My dad is very reserved with new people. The fact that he started a conversation about your work is an excellent sign. Sarah nodded, trying to smile, but inside she was panicking. The situation was becoming unsustainable. It wasn't just an innocent lie about her profession. She was deceiving a man who clearly had serious feelings for her in front of his family. In the workplace, she knew better than anyone in that room. I'm going to get some air, she said, feeling suffocated. Do you want me to go with you? No, I just need a minute. Too much going on for me. Sarah left the hall and went up to the ground floor, breathing deeply the night air of New York. She leaned against the concrete wall that separated the building from the street and closed her eyes, trying to organize her thoughts. Excuse me, aren't you Sarah? Sarah opened her eyes and turned. Around, a woman in her 40s, uniformed from the cleaning company, looked at her with a confused expression. I'm Rachel. I work the morning shift. I see you sometimes when I'm leaving and you're arriving. Sarah's blood ran cold. Oh, hi, Rachel. What a lovely dress. Are you at the company party? I didn't know cleaning staff could attend. It's complicated, Sarah murmured. Rachel looked out the window and saw David animatedly talking with a group of executives. Wow, isn't that the owner's son, Dr. David? What a handsome man. Do you know him? Rachel, please, Sarah whispered desperately. Can you not mention that you saw me here? It's a delicate situation. Rachel studied her for a moment, and Sarah saw the dawning understanding in her eyes. Oh, I see. You're with him, right? Sarah couldn't respond, but her expression said it all. My God, girl, Rachel shook her head. What a mess you've gotten yourself into. It was exactly the question Sarah asked herself every day. And now, standing there outside the building where she worked every night, wearing a borrowed dress and pretending to be someone she wasn't, she finally admitted to herself the frightening truth. She was in a mess from which she didn't know how to escape. March arrived with persistent rain that seemed to reflect Sarah's emotional state. For 2 weeks since the encounter with Rachel at the company party, she had lived in a constant state of alert, waiting for her double life to collapse like a house of cards at any moment. Every call from David, every invitation to go out, every affectionate word from him was accompanied by a pang of guilt that grew day by day. Sarah, you've been acting strange, Lisa commented during lunch. They met once, a week at a diner near the mall, where Lisa worked as a sales associate. Did David do something? No, on the contrary. Sarah fiddled with the salad she had barely touched. He has been perfect. So what's the problem? You should be glowing. I haven't seen you this happy in months, and now you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Sarah sighed, looking out the foggy window of the diner. How could she explain to her best friend that she was living a lie, that the man she was falling deeply in love with didn't know half the truth about her life? Lisa, do you think it's possible to build a solid relationship based on half-truths? Half-truths like what? Lisa frowned. Sarah, did you tell him about the kids? Sarah's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God, Sarah, it's been 5 months. How have you not told him you have 2 children?" "It's complicated, Lisa," Sarah whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "His world is so different from ours. If he knows the whole truth, if he really likes you, it won't matter. And what if it does matter? What if he realizes I'm just a housekeeper with 2 kids, living in the outskirts without a college degree, with no prospects for a better life?" Lisa leaned over the table. "First, you are not just a housekeeper. You work 3 jobs to support your family with dignity. Second, you are underestimating both yourself and him. And third, the longer you wait to tell him, the worse it will be when he finds out. What if he finds out on his own before I tell him? Ah, my friend, then you're in trouble." That same night, Sarah faced one of her greatest nightmares. Edward had insisted on taking her home after dinner, something she had always managed to avoid with excuses about late-night commitments or early meetings. But this time, he was more insistent. "Sarah, we've been dating for 5 months and I've never seen where you live," he said, as they walked down West 8th Street after watching a play at the theater. "Don't you find that strange?" "I just like to keep certain things private," she replied, feeling her stomach twist. "Private from me." There was hurt in his voice that hit her like a stab. Edward stopped walking and turned to her. "Sarah, I've opened my life to you completely. You've met my father, my friends, my work environment, but I feel like you're always keeping your distance, always avoiding letting me truly into your life." "It's not that," she tried to protest. "Then what is it? Are you ashamed of me, of the relationship, or is there something you're not telling me?" Sarah looked into his blue-grey eyes and saw not just frustration, but genuine vulnerability that made her feel even worse. "Edward, Look, if you're not ready for this closeness, I understand," he said softly. "But I need to know where we stand, because for me this isn't a pastime. I'm falling for you, Sarah." The words she had longed to hear came at the worst possible moment. "I'm falling for you too," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Then let me be a part of your life for real. Take me to see where you live. Tell me about your family, about your friends. I want to know the complete Sarah, not just the version you think I want to see." Sarah felt tears threatening to well up. "Edward, it's very complicated." "Why is it complicated? Sarah, you are the most incredible woman I've ever met. You're smart, funny, and you have a perspective on life that makes me question everything I thought I knew about what matters. Why can't you see that?" "Because everything you think you know about me is a lie," she thought, but didn't have the courage to say. "All right," she finally said, "but my apartment is very simple. It's nothing like the places you're used to." Edward smiled and took her hands. "Sarah, do you think I care about that? I grew up in mansions and penthouses, but I've never felt as at home as I do when I'm with you." Throughout the subway and bus ride to the outskirts of the East Side, Sarah devised a desperate plan. She would call Julia and ask her to take Peter to sleep at a friend's house. She would say the kids were the neighbor's children she occasionally helped take care of. She would hide the family photos. She would improvise an edited version of her real life. But when they arrived at the small dirt road where her house was, Sarah saw her plans crumble. Peter was playing soccer with friends in front of the house, and Julia was sitting on the small porch, studying under the yellow light of the terrace lamp. "Mom!" Peter shouted upon seeing her, running towards her with his shirt dirty from the ground and a beaming smile. "You got home early. Look, I scored 2 goals today." Sarah felt the world stop. Edward was right behind her, and she could feel his confusion without needing to turn around. "Mom?" Edward repeated softly. Julia looked from the porch and quickly understood the situation. Her eyes widened at the sight of the elegant man next to her mother, and she stood up from the plastic chair where she had been studying. "Peter, come here," Julia called her brother, trying to buy time for Sarah to react. But Peter, at 12 years old, didn't pick up on the tension in the air. "Mom, who is this gentleman? Is he the boyfriend that Julia said you have?" Edward looked at Sarah with an expression she would never forget. Confusion, shock, and gradually the painful understanding of the extent of the lies. "Sarah," he said, his voice controlled but clearly shaken, "are these your children?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of months of deception crashing down on her. "Edward, I can explain." "Your children," he repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. "You have children, and you never told me." "Edward, please let me explain." But he was already stepping back, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of disbelief. 5 months, Sarah. 5 months of dating, and you hid that you have 2 kids. Peter approached his mother, sensing the tension and becoming scared. "Mom, is everything okay?" Sarah knelt down and hugged her son, trying to control him while not completely falling apart in front of the kids. "It's okay, sweetheart. Edward is a friend of Mommy's." "Is it true, sir?" Peter innocently asked Edward. "Are you a friend? From my mother?" The innocent question from the child hit Edward like a punch. He looked at Peter, a skinny boy with the same expressive eyes as his mother, clearly curious and innocent, and Sarah saw his expression soften slightly. "Yes, Peter, I'm a friend of your mother," Edward replied softly, crouching down to be at the boy's level. "What's your full name?" "Peter Smith. And you?" "Edward. Edward Thompson." Julia, who had come down from the balcony and approached the group, widened her eyes upon hearing the last name. Sarah noticed the recognition on her daughter's face. Julia was smart and had probably connected the dots. "Mum," Julia said carefully, "why didn't you say Edward was coming today? I would have tidied up the house better." Edward looked around for the first time since he arrived. The small 2-bedroom house with simple windows, the makeshift porch with plastic chairs, the little iron gate that needed a fresh coat of paint. It wasn't a bad place, but it was light years away from the luxurious world he lived in. "The house is great, Julia," Edward said kindly. "Very cozy." Sarah noticed he was making a genuine effort not to show his shock, especially in front of the children. But there was a stiffness in his movements, a formality that hadn't been there before. "Edward," Sarah said softly, "would you like to come in? We can talk." "I think I better go," he replied, standing up. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Peter, Julia." "Are you coming back?" Peter asked hopefully. Edward looked at Sarah for a long moment. "I don't know, Peter." After Edward left, leaving Sarah standing at the small gate of her house with a broken heart, Julia approached her mother. "Mom, that was Edward Thompson, from the Thompson Group. I saw an article about him in the school magazine." Sarah nodded, tears finally beginning to fall. "I know, sweetheart. And you were dating him without telling that we're poor, that I work as a cleaner, that you two are the center of my life, and I could never hide you from someone important to me," Sarah finished, her voice breaking. Julia hugged her mother. "Mom, if he really likes you, that shouldn't matter." "And what if it does?" "Then he doesn't deserve you," Peter said with the simple wisdom of a child, hugging both of them. Sarah looked at her children, her true wealth, her motivation for everything, and realized that for the first time in months she was being completely honest about who she really was. The relief, mixed with the terror of having lost Edward, created a feeling of emptiness in her chest that she didn't know how to fill. 2 weeks passed since that devastating night, and Sarah felt as though she was living in two parallel dimensions. During the day, she tried to maintain a normal routine, waking up at 6:30 a.m., making breakfast for the kids, working at the cleaning company, taking care of Mrs. Alzira in the afternoon, helping the children with homework at night. But inside, it felt as if an essential part of herself had been ripped away. Edward hadn't called, hadn't sent messages, hadn't given any sign of life. Sarah obsessively checked her phone, alternating between relief and despair with every notification that wasn't from him. During the early mornings at the Thompson corporate building, she cleaned the empty hallways with a surreal feeling, knowing that just a few floors away was the office of the man who knew her intimate work routine without knowing she existed in that space. "Sarah, you've been scrubbing the same spot on the floor for 10 minutes, said Rachel, who had switched to the night shift after being promoted to supervisor. "Do you want to talk about what happened at that party?" Sarah stopped scrubbing and sat back on her heels, looking at the marble floor that reflected the fluorescent lights of the hallway. "Rachel, do you think it's possible for someone to forgive a very big lie?" "It depends on the lie and the person." Rachel sat down on the floor beside her, their voices echoing softly through the empty corridor. "Did you tell him?" "Not exactly. He found out, in the worst possible way." Rachel made a face of understanding. "Oh dear. How?" "I took him home. The kids were there. He found out I have children, that I live in the outskirts, that my life is nothing like what I let him believe. And then he left and never contacted me again." Rachel was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Sarah, you lied about having children for 5 months?" "I didn't exactly lie. I just omitted." "Sweetheart, omitting that you have 2 children isn't a small omission. It's like omitting that you're married or that you have 3 legs. Sarah laughed humorlessly. I know I messed everything up, but Rachel, if you saw his world, his father has a company worth millions. He grew up in mansions, went to the best schools, and me, I clean the floor he walks on." "Literally," Rachel observed dryly. "Literally. How was I supposed to explain that I work here? That when he calls me at 10 p.m., I'm cleaning the executive bathroom in his office?" Rachel sighed. "Sarah, have you ever thought that maybe he cared more about who you are than where you work?" "I have, and the answer is that I do care, because if he really cared about me, he would have at least tried to talk after finding out." While Sarah lived her personal drama, Edward was going through the 2 most confusing weeks of his adult life. At the office, he had become even more focused and efficient, using work as an escape to avoid thinking about the discovery that had turned his world upside down. But in his spare time, especially during lonely nights in his penthouse in Brooklyn, he found himself replaying every conversation, every moment, every sign he should have noticed. "Dr. Edward, are you okay?" Helen asked during a board meeting on a Thursday morning. "You seem distant." "I'm fine, Helen," Edward replied automatically, but his mind was far from the financial reports spread across the conference table. He was thinking about the morning Sarah had cancelled a date, saying she had urgent family commitments. At the time, he imagined it was some sick relative. Now he knew it was probably an emergency with one of her children. He was reflecting on all the times she had deflected when he asked about her family, how she always seemed tired, but he attributed it to the administrative work she supposedly did. "Dr. Edward," his father interrupted his daydreams. "Are you listening? We were discussing the expansion to the south." "Sorry, Dad, can you repeat that?" Dr. Henry studied him with keen eyes. "Edward, maybe you should take a few days off. You've been working too hard these past few weeks." "I'm fine." "You're not, and it has to do with that girl you brought to the party, Sarah." Hearing her name spoken aloud felt like a punch in Edward's gut. "I don't want to talk about it." Edward, you liked her. That was obvious to anyone who saw you together. What happened? Edward slammed the reports in front of him closed harder than necessary. I found out she wasn't exactly who I thought she was. No one is ever exactly who we think they are at first, Dr. Henry said gently. Your mother certainly wasn't. Edward looked at his father, surprised. His parents rarely spoke about the beginning of their relationship. When I met your mother, she told me she worked as a fashion consultant, Dr. Henry continued with a half-smile. I only found out 3 months later that she was a saleswoman in a downtown store, and that she had a daughter from a previous relationship. Edward straightened in his chair. Mom had a daughter before? Your half-sister, Anna. She died at 2 from pneumonia. Your mother never fully got over it, which is why we never talked about it. The revelation hit Edward like a lightning bolt. Mom lied about having a daughter. She omitted, just like she omitted that she lived in a small apartment in the East Side and supported her sick mother by working 6 days a week. Dr. Henry leaned back in his chair. Edward, do you think I fell in love with the story she told me or the extraordinary woman she was? But you came from different worlds. Completely different. And that's why it worked. She brought me authenticity, taught me the value of hard work, showed me that happiness isn't about the number of zeros in the bank account. Edward fell silent, processing the revelations. Son, if you really liked this Sarah, maybe you should talk to her. Understand why she felt the need to hide parts of her life. Because usually, when people do that, it's not out of malice. That very night, Edward drove to the east side of New York for the second time in his life. The journey through the increasingly narrow and dimly lit streets gave him time to think about his father's advice. When he arrived at the small dirt road where Sarah lived, he stayed in the car for a few minutes, observing the simple yet well-kept house. The light was on the porch, and through the window he could see Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, helping Peter with what seemed to be math homework. Julia was washing dishes in the small sink, and the three were animatedly discussing something Edward couldn't hear. For the first time since that traumatic night 2 weeks ago, Edward saw Sarah smiling, a genuine, relaxed smile, completely different from the tension he now realized she always carried when she was with him. She wasn't. Wearing makeup, her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded t-shirt and shorts. It was the most authentic Sarah he had ever seen. Edward watched the domestic scene for long minutes, feeling a mix of contradictory emotions. There was hurt from the lie, but also a growing understanding of the social chasm she must have perceived between them. There was surprise at seeing her maternal side, patient, caring, completely devoted to her children. And there was something deeper, an admiration for the woman who worked 3 jobs to support a family on her own, who, even when exhausted, found the energy to help her son with math at 10 p.m. Peter said something that made Sarah laugh out loud, and the sound of her laughter, free, spontaneous, hit Edward in the chest with unexpected force. He had missed her with an intensity he hadn't imagined possible, but seeing her there, in her natural environment, with her real responsibilities and true life, he realized he had fallen in love with only a fraction of who Sarah truly was. The question that tormented him was no longer why did she lie, but why did she feel she needed to lie? And the answer, observing the contrast between his imported Mercedes and the simple houses around, between his designer suit and the plain clothes hanging on the neighbor's line, was painfully obvious. Edward started the car and left without knocking on the door, but for the first time in 2 weeks, he felt that perhaps there was a conversation they needed to have. The question now was finding the courage to have it. April brought a melancholic routine for Sarah. The mornings were mechanical. Wake up, quick breakfast, drop the kids off at school, take 2 buses downtown to work. At the cleaning company, The afternoons were dedicated to Mrs. Smith, an 80-year-old woman with early Alzheimer's whom she had cared for 2 years. The evenings were spent helping Julia and Peter with their homework, preparing uniforms for the next day and trying not to think about Edward. But the early mornings at the Thompson corporate building had become a silent torture. Each corridor she cleaned echoed with memories of conversations she had overheard Edward having. Marina sat in her small living room, surrounded by the corporate photos that reminded her of happier moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else. Worse still, on some nights she could hear his voice coming from the office, working late, and she had to hide to avoid being seen. "Mum, why don't you call him?" Julia asked one Friday night, finding Marina staring at her silent phone. Peter was in his room, making a model of the solar system, and the two were alone in the small living room. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not? If you liked each other." "Julia, you don't understand. I lied to him for months. I let him believe I was someone completely different." Julia sat next to her mother on the worn sofa. At 16, she had developed a maturity that sometimes startled Marina, a consequence of growing up too fast in a family where she had to be responsible. "Mom, you lied about work and about us. But did you lie about who you are?" "What do you mean?" "Were you less funny with him, less affectionate, less intelligent? Did you pretend to like things you don't?" Marina thought for a moment. "No. Actually, with him, I felt more like myself than ever." "Then you didn't lie about who you are. You lied about your situation." Her daughter's observation hit Marina like a bolt of clarity. "But Julia, the situation is part of who we are, too." "Is it? Would you be a different person if you made more money? Would you be less affectionate if we lived in a bigger house?" Before Marina could respond, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Marina, this is Helen, Dr. Edward's secretary. Do you have a moment to talk?" Marina's heart raced. "Yes, of course." "Marina, I know it might seem strange for me to call, but Dr. Edward isn't well, and I have a feeling it has to do with you two." He asked you to call?" "No. In fact, he would kill me if he knew. But Marina, I've worked with him for 5 years. I've never seen him so absent. He works even more than before, but it's like he's on autopilot." Marina felt a mix of hope and guilt. "Helen, I don't know if this is appropriate." "Marina, can I ask you something? What exactly happened between you two?" "He doesn't talk about it, but it's clear it was more than just a misunderstanding." Marina looked at Julia, who was making encouraging gestures. "I made some mistakes. I omitted important things about my life." "What kind of things?" "Helen, do you know my real financial situation?" There was a pause. "I suppose it's not very good. I work as a janitor in the same building where Edward works. I have 2 kids. I live on the outskirts, and for 5 months I let him believe I was an independent executive with no family responsibilities." The silence on the other end of the line was so long that Marina thought the call had dropped. "Marina," Helen finally said, "you work in this building?" "Night shift, for 3 years." "Oh my God, you clean his office?" "Every night." Another long pause. "Marina, do you realize that this explains a lot?" "What do you mean?" "Dr. Edward always comments on how his office is impeccably clean, how he's never had issues with the cleaning staff. He praises you all in administrative meetings." Marina felt her cheeks burn. "He talks about us, always. He says the dedication of the cleaning staff is exemplary, that he notices when they do extra work, when they take care of details that others wouldn't." Helen paused. "Marina, do you see the irony in all this?" "What irony?" "He admired your work before he even knew you. You were afraid to tell him you were a janitor to a man who constantly praises janitors." The revelation hit Marina like a punch to the stomach. He really speaks well of us? Always. In fact, last month he approved a special bonus for the night staff. He said you all are the most dedicated employees in the company. Marina began to cry, a mix of relief and regret that left her speechless. Marina, are you there? I am. Helen, why are you telling me this? Because I'm a mother too. I have a daughter the same age as your Julia, and I know what it's like to make sacrifices to give the best for your children. And because, in the 5 years I've worked with Dr. Edward, I've never seen him so human as when he talked about you. Human? He smiled more, left the office earlier, talked about plans, about the future. Marina, he was in love, still is, in my opinion. But he doesn't call, he doesn't reach out. He's hurt and confused, but mainly, he's scared. Scared of what? That you pretended to like him, that the whole relationship was a lie, that now that he knows the truth about your situation, you want something from him that isn't just him. Marina understood immediately. He thinks I'm interested in his money. It's a possibility that must have crossed his mind, yes. But Helen, if I wanted his money, I would have told him about my situation from the start. I would have made up sad stories to tug at his heartstrings. I know, and deep down he must know that too. But Marina, you need to understand that Dr. Edward grew up in a world where many people approached him for what he had, not for who he was. Distrust is automatic. Marina wiped her tears and looked at Julia, who had heard the entire conversation. Helen, what do you think I should do? Honestly, I think you two should talk. Really talk. Without omissions, without hurt pride, because what you had was special, Marina. And wasting that out of fear and misunderstandings would be a tragedy. After Helen hung up, Marina sat on the sofa with Julia, processing the conversation. Mom, he likes you, even knowing everything. We don't know that, Julia. Mom, if you didn't like it, you wouldn't be suffering, and that woman wouldn't have called. Peter appeared in the room with the finished model, a solar system made of painted styrofoam balls and toothpicks. Look, it looks just like the one on the internet, he said proudly. Sarah looked at her son's creation, imperfect, made with cheap materials, but built with love and dedication. It was a perfect metaphor for her life, not sophisticated or luxurious, but real, authentic, built with hard work and love. Peter, it's beautiful, she said, hugging her son. You really paid attention to the details. Just like Mom does with everything, Peter innocently replied. That night, while the children slept, Sarah made a decision. Next Monday, after finishing her cleaning shift, she would go up to Edward's office and have the conversation she should have had a long time ago. It didn't matter if he rejected her, humiliated her, or sent her away. She owed him, and herself, the complete truth, and a real chance to understand if there was a future for them. The fear was still there, tightening her chest like a vice, but for the first time in weeks there was also hope. And Sarah had learned over the difficult years of raising 2 children alone that hope, even small, is always worth pursuing. Monday, 3:45 a.m. Sarah finished cleaning the last bathroom on the 20th floor and checked her watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Edward usually arrived at the office at 7 a.m., but sometimes he showed up earlier to work on special projects. If she wanted to talk to him before the normal workday began, she needed to go up. Now and wait. The elevator had never seemed so slow. Each floor she passed increased her anxiety and determination in equal measure. In the elevator mirror, Sarah adjusted her navy blue uniform and tried to fix the hair escaping from her ponytail. This wasn't how she had dreamed of reuniting with Edward, but perhaps it was the most honest way. Her, in her real work environment, being exactly who she was. The 25th floor was quiet and dark. only the emergency lights casting long shadows in the hallways she knew better than her own home. Sarah walked to the president's office and stopped in front of the frosted glass door that read, Edward Thompson, Chief Executive Officer. She sat in one of the chairs in the waiting area and waited, mentally rehearsing the words she would say. Edward, I need to explain. No, I'm sorry for lying. Not that either. I know you're hurt. Even worse. At 6:20 a.m., Sarah heard the ding of the elevator and her heart raced. Firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. She recognized the sound of his footsteps after months of hearing him walk through the offices during her night shifts. Edward appeared around the corner, absorbed in his phone, and nearly stumbled when he saw her sitting there. He was wearing a dark blue suit, the tie still hanging loosely around his neck, and he carried a coffee cup that he had probably bought in the lobby. Sarah, he said, stopping 3 feet away as if she were a ghost. Hi, Edward. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly. They looked at each other for a moment that felt eternal. Edward seemed thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes, and Sarah noticed he wasn't wearing the family ring he always had on his pinky, a sign of nervousness she had learned to recognize. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice colder than Sarah remembered. I work here, she said simply. Every night, for 3 years. Edward looked around, as if he were really seeing the environment for the first time. You clean this floor? All the floors, but this is my favorite. Sarah took a deep breath. Edward, we need to talk. Now? Here? Now. Here. Because if I don't speak now, I'll never have the courage. Edward hesitated, then unlocked the office door. Come in. The office was exactly as Sarah had left it a few hours earlier, immaculate, smelling of cleaning products and the subtle aroma of the men's cologne Edward wore. He sat behind the mahogany desk, positioning himself in a way that created a physical barrier between them. Sarah remained standing. Edward, I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be. Hurt is a small word, Sarah. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. You lied about your whole life. I didn't lie about who I am. I lied about my situation. What's the difference? Sarah stepped closer, to the desk, placing her palms flat on the polished surface. The difference is that I didn't pretend to be funnier or smarter or more interesting to impress you. I didn't pretend to like things I don't or agree with opinions that aren't mine. Edward watched her in silence. The difference is that I pretended to have fewer responsibilities than I do, but I didn't pretend to have less love to give. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. I pretended to be independent, but I didn't pretend to be dedicated. I pretended not to have children, but I didn't pretend the affection I felt for you. Sarah, you hid that you have 2 children. How can I trust anything you say? Because I'm here now, at 6:30 in the morning on a Monday, wearing my work uniform, telling the truth I should have told from day one. Sarah sat in the chair in front of the desk. Edward, I lied because I was scared. Scared that you would judge me. Scared that you would see me as inferior. Scared of losing the only good thing that has happened in my life in a long time. And now you're not scared anymore. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted, laughing without humor, but I learned that fear is not an excuse for dishonesty. Edward stood up and walked to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Sarah woke up. Sarah, do you have any idea what this means? You've been working for my family for 3 years. You clean my office, know my routine, overhear my phone conversations. And in 3 years, have you ever had a reason to complain about my work? Edward turned to her. No. In fact, I've always praised the night staff. Helen said you knew that. Helen called me. She told me you approved bonuses for our team, that you always speak highly of our work. Of course I do. You are exceptional." Edward returned to his chair, but this time he didn't cross his arms. "Sarah, do you see the irony? You were afraid to tell me you were a janitor, but I've always admired your work. I see that now. But Edward, you need to understand that the distance between our worlds isn't just about work. It's about everything. You grew up knowing you would inherit a company. I grew up knowing I would have to fight for every penny. You had the freedom to choose your profession. I had to accept any job that allowed me to support my children." Edward was silent for a long moment. "Tell me about them. About Julia and Peter." Sarah felt her eyes welling up with tears. "Julia is 16 and the smartest person I know. She wants to study medicine, but she knows it will be difficult because we don't have money for private college, and the public ones are very competitive. Even so, she studies until midnight every day. And Peter is 12 and a dreamer. He wants to be an astronaut or an engineer depending on the day. He made a model of the solar system with styrofoam balls last week and was prouder than you were when you closed the deal with the Japanese." Edward smiled slightly for the first time. "How do you know about the deal with the Japanese?" "Edward, I clean this office every night. Sometimes you work late. I hear your calls, see your documents scattered, witness your emergency meetings." Sarah paused. "In fact, I know you better than you think. I know you get nervous when you have important meetings because you leave the desk messier. I know you drink 3 cups of coffee before 9 a.m. when you're stressed. I know you sleep in the office when you have problems to solve because I find pillows and blankets on the couch." Edward looked at her with an unreadable expression. "You've been paying attention to me for 3 years? Edward, you're a good boss. You treat your employees with respect, care about details that other executives ignore, work more hours than anyone I know. It's impossible not to notice. Sarah, this is disturbing and fascinating at the same time. I know, and I know it complicates everything between us, because now you know that I know aspects of your professional life that perhaps even Helen doesn't." Edward stood up again and began to walk around the office. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Go ahead. When you agreed to go out with me that first night, was it because you were genuinely interested in me, or was it because you knew who I was?" The question Sarah had feared the most had come. "I didn't know who you were that first night." Edward stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "Lisa only told me your first name. I didn't make the connection between the Edward who was waiting for me at the restaurant and the Dr. Edward whose office I cleaned. I only found out when you took me to see your family's penthouse and I saw the photos." "When was that?" "In June, at the summer festival you took me to at your uncle's farm." "You knew for almost a year that I was your boss and didn't say anything?" Sarah nodded, embarrassed. "From that day on, every meeting became more difficult because I was falling in love with you, but I knew I was living a lie that only grew bigger." Edward returned to his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Sarah, this is very complicated. I know, and I know it might be too late to fix it. But Edward, I needed you to know that everything I felt for you was real. Every laugh, every conversation, every moment of connection was genuine. The only thing that wasn't real were the circumstances I created around those feelings." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelations filling the space between them. "Sarah," Edward finally said, "I need time to process all of this." Sarah felt her heart sink, but she nodded. "I understand. But thank you for coming here today, for having the courage to tell the truth." Sarah stood up to leave, but paused at the door. "Edward, one more thing." "What?" "I never wanted your money. If I had, I would have told you about my situation from the start. I would have made up sad stories. I would have asked for help. What I wanted was you, just You, and that's what scared me." She left the office, leaving Edward alone with his thoughts and the panoramic view of New York awakening to another day. For the first time in months, Sarah had been completely honest. Now all that remained was to wait and see if the truth would be enough to rebuild what lies had destroyed. 3 weeks passed since the conversation in the office, and Sarah was beginning to accept that perhaps Edward would never want to see her again. He hadn't shown any signs, hadn't sent messages through Helen, hadn't appeared in places where they used to meet. Life returned to the previous routine: work, children, financial worries. But now, with a void she didn't know how to fill. It was a Thursday in May when everything changed. Sarah was at the hospital taking care of Mrs. Smith, who had fallen at home and broken her hip. The elderly woman's family had asked Sarah to accompany her during the surgery, as she was practically the only person Mrs. Smith trusted in moments of confusion. "Sarah, Mrs. Smith is asking for her daughter again," said the nurse attending the room. "Can you try to calm her down?" Sarah approached the bed, where the 80-year-old woman seemed small and fragile among the medical equipment. Mrs. Smith had raised 5 children alone after her husband died young, working as a seamstress to support the family. Now, in her old age, only one son visited her sporadically. "Mrs. Smith, it's me, Sarah," she said softly, holding the elderly woman's wrinkled hand. "Sarah, my daughter, where is Sarah? She promised she would come to take me to church." Sarah was the eldest daughter of Mrs. Smith, who had passed away 15 years ago. In moments of confusion, the elderly woman always asked for her. "Mrs. Smith, you are in the hospital, but I'm here with you. You are a good girl, Sarah, hard-working like I was. Your mother would be proud." Sarah smiled sadly. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith." "Sarah, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Mrs. Smith." "I had a wealthy boyfriend when I was young, a handsome guy from a good family, but I was ashamed to introduce him to my family because we were poor." Sarah listened intently, intrigued by the elderly woman's sudden lucidity. "And do you know what happened? He found out where I lived and went to talk to my father. He said he wanted to marry me, even though his family was against it." Mrs. Smith squeezed Sarah's hand. "Do you know why he did that?" "Why, Mrs. Smith?" "Because true love doesn't care about those silly things like money and social status. If it does, it's not love, it's interest." The elderly woman's words echoed in Sarah's mind like a bell. Before she could respond, her phone rang. It was Julia, and she was crying. "Mom, can you come home? Something happened to Peter." Sarah's heart stopped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's physically fine, but, Mom, it's better if you come." Sarah spoke with the nurse, explained the situation, and took 2 buses in record time to get home. She found Peter sitting on the living room sofa with a bandage on his arm and an embarrassed expression. Julia was beside him, looking displeased. "Peter, what happened?" "Mom, I got into a fight at school." "A fight? Peter, you never get into fights." Julia sighed. "Mom, he fought because some boys were talking badly about you." Sarah sat down next to her son. "Talking badly about me? What do you mean?" Peter looked at the floor, embarrassed. "They saw an article in the newspaper about Edward. It said he is the heir to a big company and all that. Then they started making jokes." "What kind of jokes?" "Saying that you were interested in him, that you only got with him because of the money, that you were like a gold digger." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Peter, you didn't need to fight because of that." "Yes, I did. They don't know you. They don't know how hard you work, how you take care of us, how honest you are." Peter's eyes were filled with tears of anger. "I wasn't going to let them talk badly about my mom." Sarah hugged her son, feeling a mix of pride and pain. "Peter, sweetheart, I know you wanted to defend me, but fighting doesn't solve anything. And what does? Letting them say lies about you? It was Julia who answered. "Peter, people are going to talk anyway. The important thing is that we know the truth about who Mom is." That night, after the kids fell asleep, Sarah stayed awake thinking about Mrs. Smith's words and the passionate defense Peter had made of her. At 2 a.m., she decided to do something she had been avoiding, Googling Edward's name. The first article that appeared made her understand the source of the malicious comments at Peter's school. It was a report from a gossip magazine about young single entrepreneurs that mentioned Edward as one of the most sought-after heirs in New York and speculated about his love life, mentioning that he had been seen with a mysterious brunette at various events, but that the romance seems to have come to an end. Sarah closed her phone's browser and prepared for another night of work. But when she arrived at the Thompson corporate building at 11 p.m., she found a surprise. There was a light on in Edward's office. She cautiously made her way up to the 25th floor. Through the glass door, she could see Edward sitting at the table, but he wasn't alone. Dr. Henry was there too, and the two were having a serious conversation. Sarah began to clean the neighboring offices, staying close enough to occasionally catch fragments of the conversation. "It can't stay like this forever, Edward," she heard Dr. Henry say. "It's been almost 2 months. Dad, it's complicated." "Complicated how? You liked the girl, that was obvious. She made a mistake, but have you stopped to think about why she did that?" Sarah stopped cleaning and moved closer. "Dad, she lied about having children, pretended to have a completely different life. And you think she did that out of malice? Edward, I know selfish people. I've dealt with dozens of them over the years. They don't hide that they have children. They use their children to evoke sympathy and gain advantages." Sarah held her breath. Sarah did the opposite. She hid exactly the things that could have awakened your generosity. Why do you think she did that?" Edward was silent for a moment. "Because she was proud." "Exactly. And pride, my son, is not a flaw when accompanied by dignity. Your mother was also proud." "Dad, you've told me this story before, and I will tell it as many times as necessary until you understand. Edward, that girl has worked here for 3 years. Helen told me, 3 years without missing a day, without causing any problems, with exemplary evaluations. That's not profile of a gold digger." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "And one more thing," Dr. Henry continued. "Do you know what she did when she found out you discovered the truth?" "No." "Helen told me. She came here to the office in uniform to talk to you. She didn't make up more lies, didn't try to play the victim, didn't ask for money. She came to face the music and be honest. That, Edward, is character." Edward sighed heavily. "Dad, what if she was really interested in what I could offer?" "Then she was the dumbest gold digger in the world, because up until now she hasn't asked for anything, and on top of that, she lost her boyfriend." Sarah smiled despite the tears. "Edward, I'm going to give you the same advice my father gave me when I was scared to marry your mother. Life is too short to waste on pride. If you love this girl, and I know you do, then fight for her. And what if it's too late? It will only be too late when one of you dies. As long as you're alive, there's always a chance." Sarah walked away silently, finishing her cleaning shift with a mix of hope and nervousness she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe there was still a chance for them. Perhaps the truth, even if painful, could truly be the beginning of something new and more solid. Just as she was about to leave, she found an envelope on the cleaning cart with her name written on it. Inside was a note from Edward. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. Can you meet me tomorrow, Friday, at 7 p.m. at Central Park, near the lake? I need to tell you something important. Edward." Sarah tucked the note into her pocket and left the building feeling that perhaps her life was about to change again. Friday, 6:45 p.m. Sarah was sitting on a bench near the lake in Central Park, watching families stroll with children and couples walking hand in hand. She had arrived 15 minutes early, not just out of anxiety, but because she needed the extra time to calm her nerves and organize her thoughts. She had chosen to wear a simple navy blue dress that Lisa had given her for her birthday. Nothing too fancy, but she also didn't want to look sloppy. Her hair was down, falling in natural curls over her shoulders, and she wore only a subtle lipstick. For once, she wanted Edward to see her exactly as she was, without disguises or attempts to impress. "Sarah!" She turned and saw Edward approaching, and her heart raced, as it always did when she saw him. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple white shirt, a more casual version of the man she was used to seeing in business suits. There was something different about his posture. Less formal, more vulnerable. "Hi, Edward. Thank you for asking to talk." He sat down beside her on the bench, maintaining a respectful but not hostile distance. "Sarah, first of all, I need to apologize." Sarah blinked, surprised. "Apologize? For what?" "For disappearing. For not reaching out to you after that conversation in the office. I was processing everything, trying to understand my feelings, but it wasn't fair to leave you without an answer for so long." "Edward, you had every right to be hurt." "I did. But I also had the obligation to be mature enough to talk about it." Edward turned to face her. "Sarah, in the past few weeks, I've done a lot of reflecting. I talked to my dad, to Helen, and most importantly to myself." Sarah felt her stomach tighten with nerves. "And what did you conclude?" "That I was an idiot." Edward smiled sadly. "Sarah, you lied about your situation, but I lied to myself about what really matters in a relationship." "How so?" Edward stood up from the bench and began to walk slowly along the edge of the lake, Sarah by his side. "When I met you, what attracted me was your authenticity. You had your own opinions, laughed at your own jokes, didn't try to impress me all the time. You made me feel like I could be myself, without the expectations and formalities of my world." Sarah listened in silence, not wanting to interrupt. "But when I found out about your kids, about your job, about where you lived, I felt betrayed, as if everything that had happened between us was false. And now?" Edward stopped walking and turned to her. "Now I understand that the only false thing was the situation you created around who you really are. But who you are, the caring, funny, intelligent, dedicated woman, that was never a lie, was it?" Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "Never. Edward, I never pretended to be a different person with you. I just pretended to live a different life. And I understand why. Sarah, in the past few weeks I've researched, talked to people, tried to understand the reality of those who work as you do. And you know what I discovered?" "What?" "That you are one of the bravest people I know. Raising 2 kids alone, working 3 jobs, supporting a family with dignity, still finding the energy to be caring and optimistic. Sarah, that's no small feat." Tears began to stream down her face. "Edward, let me finish, please." He held her hands gently. "Sarah, I grew up in a world of privilege. I never had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying medicine. I never had to work 3 jobs to support people I love. And when you were afraid to tell me about your real life, I initially thought it was dishonesty. But now I understand it was protection." "Protection?" "You were protecting something precious. The chance to have a relationship where you were seen for who you are, not for what you don't have." Edward wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. "And I almost threw that away for wounded pride," Sarah sobbed. "Edward, I should have told you from the beginning, about the kids, about my job above all." "It should, but I should have also asked the right questions from the start. I should have noticed the signs. I should have created an environment where you felt safe to be completely honest." They sat down again on the bench, now closer together. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you agree to go out with me that first night? The truth, now that we have nothing left to hide." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Because when you said you were nervous, you seemed human, real. All the men I had met before tried to impress, to charm, to show they were confident, but you admitted you were nervous, and that made me feel like maybe you were different." "Was that it?" "No. You had kindness in your eyes, and when you laughed at my bad joke about traffic, you laughed for real, not out of politeness." Sarah paused. "And you waited." Lisa told me later that you arrived an hour early and stayed there, waiting, even though I was super late. That told me you were patient, that you didn't give up easily on important things." Edward smiled. "And you were right. I don't give up easily on important things." "Edward, where does that leave us? Because I need to know. Can you accept my real life? Not as something you tolerate or try to fix, but as it really is?" Edward was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "Sarah, can I be honest about something that scares me?" "You can." "I'm afraid of not being enough for you." Sarah looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "You raised 2 extraordinary children on your own. You work more hours in a week than I do in 2. You have a strength and determination that I never needed to develop because I always had everything easy." Edward paused. "Sarah, I'm afraid my privileged life has made me weak compared to you." The unexpected confession hit Sarah in the center of her chest. "Edward, you are not weak. You are different. You had different opportunities, different responsibilities. But what if I can't truly understand the challenges of your life? What if I say or do the wrong things because I've never gone through the hardships you've faced?" Sarah held his face in her hands. "Edward, do you know what was one of the things that attracted me most to you?" "What?" "You never tried to explain to me how I should live my life. You never tried to save me or fix my problems. You listened to me, respected me, made me laugh. You treated me as an equal, even without knowing my real situation." Edward covered her hands with his. "Sarah, I want to try again, but this time without lies, without omissions, without fear. I want to truly know Julia and Peter. I want to understand your routine, your worries, your dreams. Even knowing it will be complicated, that our worlds are very different. Especially knowing that. Sarah, in the past few months you have made me question everything I thought I knew about what is important in life. You showed me that happiness is not about the size of the bank account, but about the quality of the connections we make." Sarah smiled through her tears. "And you showed me that. I deserve to be loved just as I am. You do. And Sarah, yes, I love you. I love the brave woman I met at the restaurant. I love the dedicated mother I saw that night at your home. I love the exemplary professional who has worked in my building for 3 years. I love all the versions of you because they are all the same incredible person. I love you too, Edward, more than I had the courage to admit." They kissed there on the bench by the lake as the sun set over New York. It was a kiss different from the previous ones. There was no longer urgency born from the fear of losing, nor desperate passion fueled by uncertainty. It was a kiss of promise, of a new beginning, of 2 people who had finally chosen truth over fantasy. When they pulled away, Edward smiled. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. The next time you feel scared to tell me something important, tell me anyway, because now I know that we are both strong enough to handle the truth." Sarah laughed, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in months. "I promise. But Edward." "Yes?" "Are you ready to have spaghetti with sauce from a packet and listen to Peter explain for 2 hours why Pluto should still be considered a planet?" Edward laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the park. "Sarah Johnson, I can't wait." December had arrived again, and Sarah looked out the window of the small kitchen as she finished preparing the morning coffee. Exactly a year ago, she was desperately running through the streets of New York to make it to her first date with Edward. Today, he was sitting at her kitchen table trying to teach Peter how to solve a quadratic equation, while Julia laughed at the confusion they were creating. "Uncle Edward, are you sure you studied math?" Peter asked with the cruel honesty of children, looking at the paper filled with crossed-out numbers. "Peter!" Julia scolded her brother. "Be polite!" Edward laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Go ahead, Peter. Math was never my strong suit anyway. Your mom is the one who's good with numbers." Sarah smiled, serving coffee for everyone. The last 8 months had been a roller coaster of adjustments, discoveries, and yes, some difficult discussions. It hadn't been the fairy tale that some might imagine when a wealthy executive falls in love with a janitor. It had been better. It had been real. "Sarah," Edward said, checking his watch, "are you sure you don't want me to drive you to work today? I'm sure the team is still getting used to our situation. It's better if I keep taking the bus for now." Our situation was a euphemism for the small scandal that had taken over the Thompson corporate building when their relationship became public. It became public. Some employees were supportive, others gossipy, and some openly hostile. But Sarah had remained firm. She didn't want special treatment, she didn't want privileges, she just wanted to continue doing her job with dignity. "Mom," Julia said, packing her books into her backpack, "aren't you going to tell him about today?" "Tell him what?" Edward looked between mother and daughter, curious. Sarah sighed. "Edward, I was going to tell you after work, but I received a response about that course." "What course?" "Remember when you told me about the company's professional training program for employees who want to specialize?" Edward nodded. 3 months ago, he had casually mentioned that the company offered scholarships for employees interested in qualifying. Sarah had secretly applied for a technical course in property management, something that matched her practical experience, but would give her formal certification. "So? I got accepted. I start next week." Sarah tried to sound casual, but there was evident pride in her voice. Edward got up from his chair and hugged her, spinning her around in the air. "Sarah, that's fantastic. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted to make sure I earned it on my own merit, not because I'm your girlfriend." "And you did. Sarah, your professional record at the company is impeccable. You deserve this opportunity." Peter looked at the scene with a serious expression that made everyone laugh. "Uncle Edward, are you going to marry my mom?" "Peter!" Julia blushed with embarrassment. "It's a normal question," Peter protested. "You guys keep kissing. He sleeps here sometimes, helps with homework. It seems like husband stuff." Edward and Sarah exchanged glances. It was a conversation they had avoided for months, not due to a lack of feelings, but because they wanted to ensure they were building something solid for everyone involved, especially for the kids. "Peter," Edward said, kneeling, "to be at the boys' level, what would you think if I wanted to marry your mom?" "I would think it's cool, but only if Mom wants to, too. And if you promise you won't leave when things get tough." The boy's straightforward response hit Edward in the chest. "Why do you think I would leave?" "Because our dad left, and he promised he would take care of us forever." Edward looked at Sarah, seeing the pain she tried to hide whenever Rodrigo was mentioned. "Peter, can I tell you something man to man?" The boy nodded solemnly. "When a real man loves a family, he doesn't leave. He stays and faces the problems together. Your dad, he hadn't learned to be a real man when you were born. And have you learned? I'm learning every day. But one thing I can promise you, I will never abandon you. Not your mom, not you, not Julia." Peter studied Edward's face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then. But I want to keep being called Peter Smith, not Peter Thompson. Edward laughed. Of course you can. Your name is perfect the way it is. Julia, who had been silently watching the whole conversation, finally spoke. Uncle Edward, can I ask a question? Sure, Julia. Aren't you ashamed to date a janitor? The question was direct and painful, reflecting the insecurities the teenager had developed after hearing hurtful comments at school and on social media. Edward got up and sat next to her. Julia, I am proud to date a woman who works 3 jobs to support the children she loves. I am proud to be with someone who has never missed a day of work in 3 years. I am proud to love a person who raised 2 extraordinary kids on her own. But people talk. Julia, Sarah interrupted, they will always talk. The important thing is to know who we are and to be proud of it. I am proud of my work. I am proud of our family. I am proud to have raised both of you. And I, Edward added, am proud to be part of this family. Later that day, after the kids went to school and Sarah left for work, Edward was alone in the small house for the first time. He had spent countless nights there over the past few months, but always with the family present. Now, in the silence, he could truly absorb the environment. The house was small, but every corner reflected Sarah's love and care. There were photos of the kids at all stages of growth, drawings by Peter stuck on the fridge, Julia's books piled in every corner. The sofa was worn, but covered with a colourful blanket that Sarah had crocheted. It was the opposite of his minimalist and expensive apartment in the Upper East Side. Here there was life, history, memories. Edward took out his phone and called his dad. Dad, it's Edward. Hi, son. How are you? Dad, I want to marry Sarah. That's great. It was about time you admitted that. And how did she react? I haven't officially asked yet, but Dad, there's something I want to tell you. What? I want to do things the right way. I don't want a grand wedding that will embarrass her or make her feel out of place. I want something that represents who we are together. Dr. Henry was silent for a moment. Edward, are you saying you want to forgo the traditional family wedding? I'm saying I want a wedding that is about love, not about social status. And are you prepared for the consequences? Some relatives will be offended. Some family friends will make comments. Dad, in the past few months I've learned more about real relationships than I have in my entire life. Sarah has shown me that family is not about appearances or empty traditions. It's about being present, supporting each other, and choosing to stay together every day. Son, your mom and I are very proud of who you've become. Marry the way you both want. Let's support. That night, Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their first meeting, David prepared a surprise. He had asked Lisa for help to organize a special dinner at Sarah's house with all their close friends. Lisa and her husband, Helen and her daughter, some of Sarah's co-workers who had become true friends, and even Mrs. Smith, who, despite her Alzheimer's, had lucid days and loved Sarah as if she were family. When Sarah arrived home from work, she found the house decorated with simple yet beautiful lights, the table set with the dishes she had inherited from her mother, and all her loved ones gathered in the small living room. "What is all this?" she asked, emotional. "It's a celebration," David said, taking her hands. "Sarah Johnson, exactly 1 year ago, you showed up an hour and a half late in my life and changed everything." Laughter spread through the room. "You taught me that true love has nothing to do with perfection, but with authenticity. You taught me that family is not measured by the size of the house, but by the size of the hearts of the people who live in it." David knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Sarah, I can't promise that. I will understand all your challenges because we grew up in different worlds, but I can promise that I will try every day. I can promise that I will be by your side during the tough nights, in moments of joy, in worries about the kids, and in dreams for the future." Sarah was crying, her hands trembling. "Will you marry me? Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that love knows no social class, doesn't care about bank accounts, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose to build." "Yes, Sarah," whispered, then louder. "Yes!" The small living room erupted in applause and cheers of joy. Peter jumped on the couch, Julia cried along with her mother, and Mrs. Smith shouted, "Finally! This girl deserves to be happy!" David placed the ring, a simple but beautiful solitaire, nothing ostentatious, on Sarah's finger, and kissed her as everyone applauded. "David," Sarah whispered in his ear, "are you sure you're ready for our crazy life?" Sarah, after a year learning that true family is measured in love and not in luxury, after discovering that home is not a place, but the people we love, after understanding that happiness is in the simple details of everyday life, "I have never been more ready for anything in my life." Julia approached the couple. "Uncle David, does this mean you will be our official stepdad now?" "Julia, I prefer to think that you will be my children of the heart, if you want." "We do," Peter said, hugging them both. "But Mum is still the boss of the house, right?" David laughed, looking at Sarah with a love that shone through every line of his face. "Peter, your mother has always been and will always be the strongest woman I know. I'm here to support, not to lead." That December night, in a small house on the outskirts of New York, two people from completely different worlds celebrated the discovery that true love has nothing to do with where you come from, but with where you choose to go together. Sarah had learned that she deserved to be loved just as she was. David had learned that happiness cannot be bought. It is built every day with small gestures of affection and dedication, and as the extended family, carefully chosen based on love and not social status, celebrated around the small but joy-filled table, they knew they had found something more valuable than any fortune. They had found a home in each other. The Christmas Eve that began with a desperate run a year ago had transformed into the night that sealed a promise of a future built on the most solid foundation possible: truth, mutual respect, and the certainty that some social distances may be enormous on paper but insignificant when measured by the size of the heart.